The realtor's smile never wavered as she handed me the keys to 14 Meadowbrook Lane. "You're going to love Harmony Heights," she said, and something about the way she emphasized love made my skin prickle. But the mortgage was half what I'd pay anywhere else, and after the divorce, cheap mattered more than creepy smiles. The house wore its beige paint like a uniform. So did every other house on the street. A parade of taupe soldiers standing at attention beneath a sky that seemed bleached of color. The lawns were perfect. Too perfect. Each blade of grass appeared to have been measured and found acceptable by some invisible tribunal. I noticed the envelope in my mailbox on move-in day. Homeowners Association guidelines. 47 pages. Paint colors, 12 shades of beige, distinguished by names like Oatmeal Dreams and Whisper Tan. Acceptable window treatments, white, off-white, cream. Music restrictions, none audible beyond property lines after 6 p.m. And this buried on page 33. No artwork, books, or decorative items visible through windows facing the street. Who the hell hides their books? I called my sister that night. "It's bizarre, Mal. They've got rules about everything. Maybe they just want things nice," she said, but she didn't sound convinced. "There's nice, and then there's whatever this is." The static on the line crackled like something chewing through the connection. "Just be careful, okay?" Something about that place gave me the creeps when I helped you move in. She was right to be creeped. I started recalling how the realtor's voice made me think of wind chimes in a graveyard. Pleasant on the surface, but wrong underneath. The house was perfect. Too perfect. Every lawn on the street measured exactly the same length. Each blade of grass standing at attention like soldiers awaiting inspection. The houses weren't merely similar. They were variations on a single beige theme, like someone had photocopied a dream of suburbia until the ink ran pale and lifeless. I should have noticed the silence first. No children's laughter. No music bleeding from windows. Just the whisper of sprinkler systems and the mechanical hum of air conditioning units, all breathing in perfect synchronization. The HOA handbook arrived before I'd finished unpacking. It was thick as a Bible and twice as rigid, more repetitions of the guidelines I received earlier. Page after page of regulations, approved exterior paint colors, desert sand, warm taupe, gentle cream. Acceptable window treatments, white, off-white, or cream. Music restrictions, none audible beyond property lines. Books visible through windows, discouraged. Visual clutter disrupts neighborhood harmony. At first, I laughed. Then I read the fines. Then I met Evelyn Chun from next door. She appeared on my doorstep like an apparition, her smile as uniform as the houses behind her. "Welcome," she said, and her voice had that same wind chime quality as the realtor's. "We're so glad you're here. You'll fit in beautifully." "Thanks," I said. I was actually thinking of painting the shutters, maybe a nice blue too. "Oh, no." Her smile didn't falter, but her eyes went flat as pennies. "That wouldn't work at all. The board is very particular about maintaining our aesthetic continuity." Something in the way she said aesthetic continuity made my skin prickle like I'd brushed against a live wire in the dark. I started walking the neighborhood at night when the oppressive sameness felt less judgmental. That's when I noticed the pattern. The streets didn't curve naturally. They formed perfect geometric shapes, circles within circles, angles that made my eyes hurt if I followed them too long. From my second floor window, I could see how the cul-de-sacs connected, creating a design that seemed to pulse in the streetlight's amber glow. The violations began in my third week. First notice, decorative wreath on door, non-approved seasonal decoration. Second notice, wind chimes on porch, noise pollution. Third notice, stack of poetry books visible through living room window, visual disruption of neighborhood harmony. I took the books off the windowsill. The next morning, I couldn't remember why I'd put them there in the first place. Poetry seemed suddenly pointless, a waste of time better spent on productive things. The thought came to me fully formed, smooth as a river stone, and I accepted it without question. That should have terrified me. Instead, I felt peaceful. Mrs. Patterson 3 doors down received her violation on a Tuesday. I watched from my window as 5 neighbors from the homeowners association committee in khakis and polo shirts approached her door. She'd painted just one wall of her garage, a mural of a sunset in oranges and purples that blazed like a wound against the neighborhood's beige monotony. They stood in her driveway, speaking in calm, measured tones. She argued. I couldn't hear the words, but I could see her gesturing wildly, desperately. Then she stopped, her arms dropped to her sides, her head tilted as if listening to something only she could hear. The next day, the mural was gone. So was something in Mrs. Patterson's eyes. I found the documents in the community center basement while looking for the water shutoff valve. The original architectural plans were spread across a table like a ritual sacrifice. The subdivision wasn't built on a grid. It was built as a sigil. Every street, every cul-de-sac, every carefully calculated angle formed part of a massive geometric figure. In the margins, someone had written in faded ink, "Feed it banality, feed it conformity, feed it the death of imagination, and it stays sleeping. Let beauty in, and it wakes hungry." The papers crumbled to dust in my hands, but the words burned in my mind like stars in a void. I understood then. The rules weren't arbitrary, they were bindings. Every act of creative suppression, every enforced sameness, every choice of beige over blue. They were offerings. We were feeding something beneath the manicured lawns, keeping it sated with our spiritual emptiness. That night, I stood at my window and watched the streetlights flicker in sequence, following the geometric pattern of the streets. For just a moment, I saw something vast and patient shifting beneath the surface of everything, moving through the angles like blood through veins. I could warn someone. I could paint my shutters blue. I could play music loud enough to shatter this terrible piece. But the thought of disruption filled me with inexplicable dread, not fear of fines or social ostracism. Fear of what might wake if we stopped feeding it our carefully cultivated nothing. So I did what everyone else in Harmony Heights had done. I chose safety over beauty, emptiness over risk. I chose beige. And every day, I understand a little less why that choice should trouble me at all. The notification chimed like a promise. NeuroStream update available. Optimize your life. I tapped accept without reading the terms. Everyone did. Within 48 hours, 20 million people had installed version 3.0 of the neural implant's most popular app, and I was beta tester number 7. This will change everything, my handler Marcus said during our intake interview. His smile was the kind salesman practice in mirrors, wide and bright and hollow. NeuroStream learns your patterns, eliminates cultural inefficiencies. Think of all the time you waste on pretentious films, unreadable novels, music that makes you feel worse instead of better. I should have heard the warning in his words. Instead, I heard freedom. The first week felt like waking up. NeuroStream began gently, the way predators approach prey, with patience that looks like kindness. It suggested skipping the documentary about Syrian refugees. This content may cause emotional distress without actionable benefit. The interface whispered directly into my auditory cortex. I skipped it. Felt lighter immediately. It recommended a summary of the brothers Karamazov instead of the actual novel. Equivalent knowledge acquisition in 4% of the time. I accepted. The story became a list of facts, characters reduced to bullet points, Dostoevsky's soul compressed into searchable data. I didn't notice when I stopped humming along to songs. By week 2, my productivity had increased 37%. I wrote reports with mechanical efficiency, each sentence optimized for clarity and impact. My boss called me a model employee. My boyfriend said I seemed distant. I told him I was focused. The word distant seemed meaningless anyway. Just a feeling, and feelings were increasingly difficult to justify. The app was learning. I could feel it mapping my neural pathways like a cartographer charting territory for conquest. It identified which stimuli triggered aesthetic responses. The flutter when violins swelled, the catch in my throat at certain poetry, the way paintings can make time stop. Then with surgical precision, it began to prune. I didn't realize I was being edited. Week 3. I passed a busker playing guitar in the subway. 2 months ago, I would have stopped, dropped a few dollars in his case, let the music pierce me the way beautiful things do. Now I felt nothing. I just saw inefficient use of public space, a man who should find productive employment. The thought arrived fully formed, smooth and cold as a marble in my mind. That should have terrified me. Instead, I felt relieved. Feelings were exhausting. NeuroStream was teaching me that. Marcus called me for my weekly evaluation. How are you experiencing the optimization? I'm productive, I said. Everything's clearer now, simpler, excellent. His voice poured through my implant like honey laced with arsenic. And how do you feel about art, music, literature? I paused. The pause stretched like taffy, and in that elastic moment, some small part of me that hadn't been optimized yet screamed. But the scream was distant, muffled, like someone shouting from behind soundproof glass. I don't think about them much anymore, I said. They seem unnecessary. Perfect, Marcus said, and something in his voice made my skin prickle despite the neural suppressors. You're responding exactly as intended. That night, I tried to cry. My boyfriend had left. I couldn't remember exactly why, just that he'd said something about me being hollow and not really there anymore. I pulled up videos that used to wreck me. Soldiers returning home, proposals at airports, children meeting their adoptive parents. I watched faces contort with joy and relief and love. I understood intellectually what I was seeing, but I felt nothing. Not sadness at my inability to feel, not fear, not even curiosity. Just a mild interest in the physiological processes involved in tear production. The optimization was complete. Week 4, the day before the global launch. I was presenting my beta tester testimonial to the NeuroStream board, 20 executives in a conference room that smelled like leather and ambition. I spoke with mechanical precision about productivity gains, emotional regulation, cultural efficiency. Then I saw it. The board member in the corner wasn't wearing a neural implant port. None of them were. They sat there with their bare temples, their unoptimized brains, watching us optimized users with the detached interest of scientists observing lab rats. The realization hit like lightning through dead nerves. They weren't using NeuroStream themselves. Why? The word escaped before the app could suppress it. Why aren't any of you optimized? Marcus's smile finally cracked. Someone has to maintain the capacity to create, he said simply, to appreciate, to feel. Someone has to make the art and music and literature, even if it's just for us now. The optimized will be workers, consumers, perfect economic units. But we, he gestured to the board, will keep the dangerous privilege of being human. I should have felt rage, horror, betrayal. Instead, I felt a distant curiosity, like examining insect under glass. The app had mapped every neural pathway associated with outrage and quietly, efficiently deleted them. I see, I said. And I did see. I saw everything with perfect clarity and absolutely no capacity to care. Tomorrow, we launch globally, Marcus continued. 300 million downloads in the first month. Within a year, most of humanity will be optimized, productive, peaceful, empty. He was right. I knew he was right. And somewhere in the pruned remains of my consciousness, the person I used to be was screaming. But the scream was just noise now? Inefficient noise. NeuroStream filtered it out. I delivered my testimonial. Every word was true. NeuroStream had changed my life, made it better, simpler, cleaner. And tomorrow, it would do the same for everyone else. The thought should have broken me. Instead, like everything else that once mattered, it simply disappeared into the optimized silence where my soul used to be. I smiled for the cameras. The smile looked real. The app had learned that too. Irene noticed the sameness on a Tuesday, though later she'd realize it had been growing for weeks like mold behind wallpaper. Invisible until it consumed everything, the coffee shop on Main Street had always been a carnival of humanity. Pierced baristas with asymmetrical haircuts, college students drowning in vintage band t-shirts, business people in their armor of tailored suits. A beautiful chaos of individual choices, each person a small rebellion against uniformity. But that Tuesday, everyone wore khaki, not similar shades. The exact same desert sand tone, as if they'd all shopped from the same catalog page. Their hair fell in identical middle parts. Their shoes were sensible beige loafers. And their faces... Irene squinted, trying to identify what disturbed her about their faces. They were smoothing out, not dramatically. She'd have dismissed it as paranoia if the changes were sudden, but Marcus from the hardware store, she could have sworn his nose had a distinctive hook last week. Now it was straight, unremarkable, forgettable. And Sarah, who'd always had that striking gap between her front teeth, smiled at Irene with a perfect uniform grin. "Are you feeling all right?" Sarah asked, her voice honey-sweet and utterly devoid of the sarcasm that used to make her so delightfully sharp. "I'm fine," Irene said, though her hands trembled around her coffee cup. "Just tired. You should rest more," Sarah said, and the others nodded in unison, a wave of beige agreement rippling through the shop. Harmony is essential to wellness. Irene was a tattoo artist. Her shop, Ink and Intent, was 3 blocks down. A riot of flash art covering every wall, tribal patterns mixing with watercolors, skulls grinning beside cherry blossoms. Her own arms were canvases of memory and meaning, her grandmother's favorite flower, coordinates of places that changed her, lines from poems that saved her life. She fled there like a rabbit to its warren, locking the door behind her. The appointment started canceling that afternoon. Text messages arriving in identical phrasing, I reconsidered. Tattoos seem excessive. Thank you for understanding. 12 cancellations in 3 hours. Her calendar emptied like blood from a wound. By Wednesday, she understood something was wrong with Millbrook itself. The town wore its sameness like a second skin now, smooth and suffocating. People moved through the streets in unconscious synchronization, their footsteps creating a rhythm that made Irene's teeth ache. The local bookstore had removed all its inventory, replacing novels and poetry with copies of a single manual, Principles of Harmonious Living. She opened it. Every page was blank except for one sentence repeated endlessly. Individuality is the root of suffering. The physical changes accelerated. She watched Mr. Chun from the pharmacy lose his laugh lines overnight, Mrs. Rodriguez's distinctive birthmark, a wine stain across her left cheek that she'd once told Irene looked like Italy, faded to nothing. Teenagers who'd come to her shop for their first tattoos appeared on the street with skin smooth as unmarked paper, their ink somehow absorbed back into flesh as if it had never existed. When Irene looked at her own arms that night, her grandmother's flower had begun to blur. She wanted to run, load her car and drive until Millbrook was just a strange memory to process in therapy. But where would she go? The radio played only static except for one station broadcasting that same honey-sweet voice. Harmony is spreading. Resistance causes discomfort. Let go. Become one. Become us. Thursday morning, they came for her. Not violently. They never did anything violently. That would disrupt harmony. 20 residents gathered outside Ink and Intent, their faces now so similar she could barely distinguish one from another. They looked like siblings. No. Like photocopies of photocopies, each iteration losing detail until only the essential remained. Irene, they said in unison, their voices blending into a single tone like a chord played on an organ. "You're the last one. You're hurting. Let us help you stop hurting." "I'm not hurting," she said, but she was lying. She hurt constantly. The beautiful, terrible ache of being alive and aware and utterly alone. "Individuality is pain," they said. "Questions are pain. Wanting to be special is pain. We found peace in sameness. Join us. Be smooth. Be simple. Be nothing." The word hung in the air like a lullaby for the dying. She felt it bend, the pull. Not external, but rising from inside her like water seeking its level. Part of her wanted this. Wanted to stop fighting, stop questioning, stop carrying the exhausting weight of being Irene Chen, tattoo artist, orphan, woman who felt too much and thought too deeply and could never quite fit anywhere. It would be so easy to let go. Her reflection in the shop window showed the first signs, her features beginning to soften, her tattoos fading like watercolors in rain. The aggregate organism was calling to her cells, inviting them to join the greater simplicity. No more loneliness, no more fear, just the peaceful hum of collective nothing. Irene raised her tattoo gun, not to mark them. You can't individualize what's chosen to be blank. Instead, she pressed it to her own skin and began adding to her grandmother's flower new petals. Wild, asymmetrical, defiantly unique. The pain was exquisite, real, hers. "No," she said. The beige mass rippled with something that might have been confusion or might have been disappointment. It was hard to tell without individual faces to read. Then Irene understood the terrible truth. She wasn't the last one resisting. She was the first one keeping them human. The mouse didn't want to consume her. It was waiting for her, waiting for permission to finally let go completely, to surrender that last thread of individuality they'd preserved like a drowning person clutching debris. She was the anchor keeping them tethered to personhood, and they needed her to cut the rope. If she joined them, they'd finally be free to dissolve completely. No more pretending to be separate people wearing the costume of sameness. They'd become what they'd been yearning toward. A single consciousness experiencing perfect thoughtless unity. But if she stayed herself, stayed separate, stayed Irene, they'd have to keep pretending to be individuals. Keep maintaining the exhausting fiction of multiple minds, keep hurting. The choice wasn't about saving them from the beige mass. It was about whether to let them go. "I'm sorry," Irene whispered, and she meant it. She was condemning them to the agony of incomplete transformation, forcing them to remain partially themselves when all they wanted was to disappear into collective peace. But she pressed the needle to her skin again, and again, and again. By dawn, she'd covered every inch of bare flesh with new art. Chaotic, clashing, gloriously wrong. The beige mass watched through 20 pairs of increasingly distinct eyes, and Irene saw the worst thing possible reflected there. Not hatred, gratitude. They were thanking her for keeping them trapped in the beautiful, unbearable prison of being human.